So the agenda of today's session is only uh, to learn about the prototypes. So prototypes are nothing but your wireframes or screen mockups that you create as a business analyst for a particular project. So we would learn and understand what are prototypes, what is the purpose of prototypes, what's the prototyping process in a typical project, and the dimension in prototypes. What are the types of prototypes, advantages and disadvantages of prototypes? We would also see which is the best time to use prototype and which is the worst time to use prototypes when it comes to system modeling. And we would see two of the prototyping model, that is spiral approach and DSDM method. And we would do our hands-on on prototypes using Excel and AXURE. So I believe everyone has downloaded the trial copy of AXURE. So you can do the prototyping along with me when I would give you a hands-on on these two tools, Excel and AXURE. So we'll do it together. So before that, we'll first understand the theoretical concepts around the prototypes. So what do you think? When is the time which when you would be using prototype for a particular system? Any thought process? So we covered 3-4 types of system. Like we had system which we created from scratch. We have a system wherein we get change requests. Then we have a service-based system which is outsourced to us. What do you think? What is the right time to create prototype in an order around this system? Let's say an example of product-based development. In that particular development, and you are, let's say, using an agile methodology. So what is the right time when you start creating prototypes? Will it be in the initial phases of requirement gathering, or will it be at the time of requirement discussion, or what is the time when you would be creating prototypes?
After requirement gathering and before we start the development process.
Okay, everyone agrees to her. Yes. Yes. Okay, so it actually depends on the context of the project. So requirement gathering is something that's a parallel activity that you have to do in and around the requirements. But prototyping essentially starts from day one when you are taking up that particular assignment as a business analyst. Because prototyping is something whenever you are creating, conducting a chat session or a interviewing session or any focus group session for that matter, you are getting lots of input in and around how the system should look like, what is their expectation, what are the functionalities they are looking for a system. So in and around those discussion, you tend to have a visual representation of the system in your mind. So in order to capture that visual representation of the system, okay, this option would come first, this particular option would come after this particular option has been selected. You need something to do with, or something, or a place wherein you capture all your thoughts or all your understanding in and around that particular system from a visual perspective. Functional perspective, we have the requirements that we write parallelly, but from a visual perspective, how the system should look like when we develop this particular system, how this system would look like to the end customer. So the prototyping, the initial thoughts, it starts from day one. However, when you have completely written the functionalities and when you map those individual elements with the final prototype, that is where you get your final prototype. But you start this activity right at the time of your what I would say interview techniques, or wherever you are conducting any sort of session. So whatever inputs you are getting in and around that particular system, like we would like to have our system with this menu, we would have the system with this option. So where these things would go, simple plain textual requirement is not sufficient. You want to highlight these particular requirement in a visual format. So prototyping plays a role in capturing those requirement in visual format. So there are certain options how you could capture the prototype. Either you could capture the prototype to the simplest way in the form of your simple pen and paper. So those prototypes can keep on evolving after every session that you conduct with your stakeholder. So let's say in today's session, you identified, okay, there would be 4 menu in the UI screen. After 2 days, you have another set of meeting with that particular stakeholder and you show this paper prototype to that particular stakeholder. Depending on our last discussion, I identified that this system would be having 4 menu. Then the stakeholder would say, okay, fine. Now let me give you the requirement for the sub menu. So in the next session, the prototype keeps on evolving, or the diagrams or the view that you have created on paper, they keep on evolving. Now, in this particular process, the final set of prototype that you develop would only come into the picture when you have conducted subsequent number of sessions with that particular stakeholder. When the stakeholder and you are on the same page, okay, this is the final look or this is the final UI that I would like to see when my final system would be completed and delivered to me. So this is the case when you are doing a paper-based prototype. There are other ways by which you could develop a prototype. Now, secondly, if you want, let's say there is a situation wherein you and your stakeholder are not co-located in the same place. Your stakeholder is in a different country. Then the paper-based prototype would not help him. So what you would do, you could do same static prototype with the help of any XYZ tools. For example, you could create a Microsoft Excel prototype. You could create a simple Microsoft Paint prototype and send it to him for approval. Basis on our discussion, this is the prototype I have created. Now you give me your thoughts on this particular prototype. So he would review your prototype and would may ask you that, okay, I would need these changes. The placement of menu is not proper, or the placement of radio button is not proper. I would like to have this thing. I would like to apply some color themes. So in that context, you keep on evolving that particular prototype. So in order to summarize, prototype is something that keeps on evolving. It is not finalized on day 1 or day 2. Depending on the requirement or the versioning of the requirement, how many versions of requirement you create throughout your requirement gathering or designing process, the prototype keeps on evolving. Until and unless you get your final prototype approved, that is something your system has to resemble when your final system is built up or coded or tested. So there are a series of process that you need to follow when you are dealing with the prototypes. So let us see what are these prototypes and what is its purpose. So as I said, they can be defined as incomplete version of the software program being developed. So prototype typically simulates only a few aspects of the feature of the eventual program and may be completely different from the eventual implementation. So what happens in prototyping is like when you create a prototype, so what you essentially represent to the stakeholders, maybe it's a developer, maybe it's a what I would say a tester, or maybe it's your business stakeholder who gives you a requirement. That is the initial representation of the system when you are in the requirement analysis or gathering phase. But eventually, when your end system gets built, there would be n number of changes the business stakeholder might have asked you to um, change in that particular prototype. So sometimes what happens, typically let's consider a scenario when the project length is of 1 year duration. So initial 3 months are designated for your analysis and design. So whatever prototype you create in this initial 3 months and whatever is delivered towards the end of 1 year, there would be a huge difference between them. this may happen. Why this may happen? Because the prototypes keeps on evolving, and you as a business analyst, if you are unable to keep track of the evolving request for a particular prototype, then the stakeholder who is testing that particular system, maybe a UAT user, user acceptance testing user, or maybe a prod user, he may see a huge difference between the prototypes and the actual system that has been delivered to them. So it's essentially your responsibility as a business analyst, like you are versioning the other documents, like your business requirement document or a functional specification document or a UML use case, like you are updating other documents, it's your responsibility to keep the prototypes updated as well, which you have captured in the initial stage of your analysis and design phase. So essentially what happens in a particular project is like the BAs feel that prototyping is something that you have created in the initial phase of design. Now we should focus on what the system is in front of us. No, that's not the correct approach. Like the other documents, the BRD, the user stories, or whatever the business analysis architects, it's your responsibility to keep the prototypes updated as well. It's very uncommon that the stakeholder may use the prototype as a reference, may not use the prototype as a reference once the system is delivered to them, but you have to keep it updated. Essentially, what happens in a particular project is like the BAs are not that much active in terms of keeping the prototypes updated. So that creates a huge ambiguity when it comes to, validate the requirements against what it has been captured in the initial requirement analysis and designing phase. So you have to ensure that as a business analyst that whatever prototype you had created, you keep it updated. Now, what is the purpose of prototyping? So prototyping essentially gives us the pictorial representation or the visual representation of how the system would look like. Because whenever you are dealing with a particular stakeholder, plain textual requirement or UML use cases is fine. That is again how the system would be having the interaction with different users in that particular system. But what about the visual representation, how the system would look like? So that is where the prototyping would come into the picture, wherein you would show that particular business user that after we have built the system, this is how your end system would look like, or how your final deliverable would look like. Now, there is a catch over here. So what happens essentially whenever, this is my real life experience I'm sharing with you. What happens is like the development team. Now you have created your functional specification document, you have created your business requirement document, and you have created all the necessary artifacts like your from a database context, you have created all the physical schema, logical schema, conceptual schema, the data dictionary. From a user interaction perspective, you have created your use cases, UML models. From a workflow perspective, you have created your process models in and around that particular system. And from a UI perspective, you have created a particular prototype. And you have given that particular prototype for development team to refer. Now, what essentially thought process, a typical developer thinks around the prototype is like, this is the final system that needs to be delivered. So he do not think from a holistic view that, okay, there are certain limitations in that particular prototype. Because of course, prototype, if you see, it do not have a logic. It only shows how the system would look like. It's just a visual representation. But the logic, the interaction, that is something a development team should suggest to a business analyst, and basis on which you as a business analyst would go to the business stakeholder and say, okay, this is the technological suggestion that we have received from the development team. What is your take on? To give you a simple example, let's consider a show hide condition. Let's say there is a age group. So in that particular application, so we have a set of radio buttons like age group 1 to 15, they would be treated as child group. Age group 15 to 30, they would be treated as adult group. Age group 30 to 45, they would be treated as senior group. And 45 above, they would be treated as senior. Sorry, what I would say, any elder group or any person who is very senior in nature. So we have 4 category of group in this particular application. Now, whenever your user selects a particular checkbox, there would be a certain set of questionnaires that needs to be populated. So depending on that particular questionnaire, there may be certain elements or certain logic that may be getting executed. Now, in a prototype, you could clearly articulate these 4 groups through a radio button or a checkbox. Or you, to the best, what you could show, the show hide condition. Like if I click on this particular group, I would get these necessary set of questions. Now, what about the behind the scene logic? Your prototype doesn't allow you to create those behind the scene logic because there are certain limitations. If that would have been possible using prototype, then why would the development team needed at the first place? So that is something that you need to document in your requirement specs or your software specs, that if I click on this particular user group and I get a 10 set of questions, this is the logic that should get executed. So this way you are linking your prototype with your functional specification document, and if there are some logic that is being executed, you have to clearly articulate to the development team, because development team sees these document in isolation. They see prototype as one document, they see your what I would say a logic as one document, your functional spec as one document, your UML and use cases as one document. They never bring all this document together and think from the holistic view of the entire system. So you as a business analyst are supposed to tell the development team that how the system would work with the help of these prototypes and all the related artifacts that you have created. Now, there are certain processes that you need to follow when you are creating a particular prototype. For example, you have to start with identifying the basic requirements, wherein you determine what is the requirement, such as security requirement can typically be ignored. Essentially the requirements that come or are major concern in prototypes are the UI and user experience requirement, like how the elements in a particular UI would be placed in a particular screen, like your menu box, combo box, checkbox, drop down box, those kind of requirements, and what would be a necessary set of interaction that would be happening in that particular UI. So that is essentially the basic requirement. Rest, all the non-functional requirements like security, scalability, for that matter, if there is a batch executing behind the system on a click of a particular button, that is something we are not supposed to document as part of our prototyping process as a business analyst. So once we have identified the basic requirements around what are the things, what are the UI elements we would be mapping to the system using prototype, the next step that we follow is develop initial prototype. So there are different types of prototype or different dimension of prototype that we would see in a while. So we tend to develop the initial prototype after we have identified the basic requirement. After that, we have the prototype reviewed by the business user or the end customer and get their feedback. Like, do you feel that these are the elements that have been mapped in this particular prototype? Is it sufficient? Or you would like to add or exclude some of the elements from this prototype? You tend to get those kind of feedback from your end customer or the business sponsors. After that, if there is a revision needed, you revise and enhance the prototype, and you again get that prototype reviewed by your business stakeholders. If they approve it, then that's your final prototype. So these are essentially the 4 things that you need to follow as part of your prototyping process. Identify the basic requirement, develop initial prototype, review, and then revise and enhance the prototype. So review has 2 branches. One, if modification is needed, then you revise it. If modification is not needed, then it's your final approved prototype. Send it to the development team for development purpose. Now there are certain dimensions in prototype. There are 2 dimensions in prototype, like the horizontal dimension and the vertical prototype. Now what happens in horizontal dimension is like for a user interface prototype, it provides a broad view of an entire system or subsystem, focusing on user interaction more than your low-level functionalities such as database access. Horizontal prototypes are useful for confirmation of user interface requirements and system scope. Your demonstration version of the system to obtain buy-in from the business and develop preliminary estimates on development time, cost, and effort. So when we are working on a particular business requirement document, we essentially create horizontal prototypes. So in horizontal prototype, we typically capture that, okay, the business user has asked us to build a particular system. So we tend to understand what is the scope of the system and how many number of screens would be needed to develop that particular system. Is it 15 screen would suffice the purpose, or you would be needing 20 screens to create that particular end-to-end system? So what essentially happens when we define the scope in and around 15 to 20 screen, we get an initial estimates of development time, cost, and effort. So how much time would it be needing, how much cost it would be needing, and what's the effort it would be needing to develop that 15 to 20 screens. So that is what your horizontal prototypes would tell you at a very high level. And it also helps us to buy in from the business. Buy in from the business as in, if your I mean business requirement document clearly documents those 15 to 20 screens, and it has all the necessary options that a customer would like to see in his application, then it's certainly an eligible candidate that the business requirement document would get approved in the initial 2 to 3 weeks of your project start. If it is not meeting that particular objective that the business user would like to see in that particular application, then it may get delayed because you would again rework on those screen and send it to approval, and this process would go on continuously until and unless you get a final approved BRD from that particular business sponsor. So it also helps in terms of buying of the business. So this horizontal prototype sits at a very high level, the high level view of the system. These are mostly static prototypes. These are not the detailed prototypes that you create in your business requirement. The next set of prototype is your vertical prototypes. Now here you elaborate your single subsystem or function. So the SRS example I gave you, whatever prototypes you are creating in software requirement specification, those prototypes would be part of your vertical prototype. Those are the subset of your horizontal prototype. So here you refine the database design, how the database would look like in terms of prototyping. You obtain information on data volumes and system interfaces needs for network sizing and performance re-engineering. Clarify complex requirement by drilling down to actual system functionality. So whenever you would be having, let's say you want to explain a batch process being executed by a hit of a particular button. For example, if you click on a button like backup or restore, so these two buttons, backup and restore, would trigger a batch process behind the system. So after clicking on that particular button, what would be the behavior of the system? How your system would be interacting with any third-party system, and how the batch process would execute. What information you would be sending to the third-party system, and what information the third-party system would be sending to your system. Those kind of detailed elaboration has to be done in this context when you are dealing with vertical prototypes. So to summarize, at a higher level, horizontal prototypes are mapped to your business requirement document, and vertical prototypes are mapped to your software requirement specification. So horizontal prototypes are at a very high level, typically static in nature, or if needed, somewhat interactive in nature. Vertical prototypes are more detailed in nature. It would give each and every information about the click of a button, click of a radio button, click of a drop down, selection of a drop down, what's the logic that you are executing, and supporting artifacts that could help develop that particular logic. Any questions, anyone so far? Okay. So there are certain types of prototype that we see when we are working as a business analyst. The very first type is throwaway prototype. So throwaway prototype is like the paper-based prototype, which we create in a particular simple pen and paper. So these prototype is like you sit in a particular interview session, you show that prototype to the business users, business stakeholder, and the business stakeholder verifies that particular prototype, and he sees, okay, we are fine with this particular prototype, and no further action is needed. Now he says that, okay, if you could move this particular menu from top to bottom, being it a paper-based prototype, you cannot actually move the menu from top to bottom in the same meeting itself. So what you do, you create a new prototype based on his input on a new paper. So this process keeps on evolving as in a continuous way. So that is the reason why they are called as throwaway prototype. So you create a prototype, show it to the business. If he likes it, he approves it. If he doesn't like it, you just throw away that prototype and create a new prototype. So this is one particular approach for creating a prototype. So when this approach would be used, only when your business user or your stakeholder are in the same location. If and you are able to conduct a face-to-face meeting with them, only then this method is advisable. If that is not possible, there is GUI-based throwaway prototype. So GUI-based throwaway prototype is like your prototype that you create using your Microsoft Paint or any tool that is capable of taking a snapshot of your screen. So those are GUI-based prototype. You are doing the same thing, but it is more from a system context. You are creating those prototypes in the system rather than using simple pen and paper. So here also, if the user doesn't feel like, you just scrap that particular elements from the UI and you go on creating a newer prototype. So these are GUI-based prototype. Now to give some more information about GUI-based prototypes. So these days, whatever product development companies are there, so let's say we have an insurance domain product or a finance domain product. So those products are also capable of allowing the user to create certain prototypes. Those product itself has some features which helps the business analyst team to create prototype on that particular product itself without any logic. So those can also be mapped as a part of your GUI-based prototype. Then there are evolutionary prototypes, typically used in a gaming development environment, wherein we are in a constant need of evolving the prototypes. Evolving the prototype, let's say we have a particular set of game titles with us. So there would be a certain user interface, then there would be a certain elements, some actions that would be happening in that typical game. Now, after 6 months, the gaming company decides to relaunch that particular game with a different set of features. So what essentially happens over there is we are evolving that particular prototype, or we are creating newer features in that particular game, or newer elements in that particular game. So evolutionary prototype would be used in a context wherein there is a constant need or constant need of change for a particular interface or a particular UI or screen. That particular platform cannot stay with the same UI interface for around 5 years or 10 years. After every 6 months, they need a change in UI, or after every year, they need a change in UI. So that is only possible when the user needs, the end user's needs or demands are that much compelling enough to trigger that particular action. So these are the projects which are more from a gaming perspective or more from a user interface perspective, or for that matter, if you are a graphic designer. So there are different softwares that are available these days, like you have Adobe Suite, which is specifically targeted to the graphic designer. So their UI keeps on changing every 1 or 2 years. They do not stay with the same UI, the GUI-based platform which they are using. So in those scenarios, you would be using evolutionary prototypes, not in regular projects that you are working in insurance, banking, or any retail domain project. There you would never use evolutionary prototypes. Then there is something called as incremental prototypes. So the final product is built as separate prototype. At the end, the separate prototypes are merged in an overall design. So by the help of incremental prototypes, the gap between user and software developer is reduced. So let's consider in an agile development. you are working on 4 5 different epics. So every epic would be having a different set of prototypes associated with it. So towards the end, you would merge all these particular functionalities from a system context. You would merge all these prototypes and see together whether the objective that has been perceived in and around that particular system has been achieved or not from a business sponsor standpoint. So here you develop prototype in parts, but at the end, when you combine the overall system, the prototype has to provide that perceived value to the business stakeholders. Now, extreme prototype are also can be considered like your evolutionary prototypes. So extreme prototype are more rich in terms of graphic content. So graphic content is like your what I would say, it's not about how the screen navigation would happen, or it's not about how a particular functionality is achieved, but the look and feel of the system is also given more emphasis in extreme prototype, like your game development project or any project wherein UI is given more emphasis. In that context, extreme prototype would be very helpful. So in that context, what's the difference between evolutionary prototype and extreme prototype? So evolutionary prototype is something that dictates that you cannot keep the same UI constant for next 4 or 5 years. Your UI should be evolving. And in extreme prototype, we have to ensure that all the elements in the UI has to be of extreme high quality. The user experience, the UI elements, the coloring, the texture of the elements. Even if it's a drop down box, you can apply some style sheets to that particular drop down. Even if it's the radio button, you could apply the style sheet to a radio button and make it more interactive and intuitive to the user. How the user would be behaving when he would be coming into that particular system, how you would be suggesting the user the suggestion, maybe through notification, maybe through a pop-up, maybe through a message. So these kind of elements, how you are simplifying the life of a particular user when he is interacting with your system, those all would come into the picture when you are creating your extreme prototype. It is more from a user experience perspective rather than user interface. So these are the 5 category of prototypes that exist in today's IT projects landscape. Any questions, anyone so far?
Hello?
Yeah.
So I have two questions. Like, for example, is it possible that companies like Xbox, PlayStation are planning to develop a new game and business analyst is involved in development of that new game? Is it possible?
Yes, of course.
So, like, while developing, let's say, a game that is, most of you must be knowing Counter-Strike. So, how will the prototype would look like for that? I mean, just for a basic example.
So it would be a part of your extreme prototyping, which we discussed, the last category of prototype, wherein
Okay.
you as a business analyst would be sitting with a graphic designing team, and you would be giving them idea about how the interaction would happen when he would be using that particular prototype. So this won't be essentially termed as prototype in that context. It would be the graphic interaction that you would be doing with the particular user when you are working in that particular game development project. For Counter Strike, how this thing happens is like before giving a final conclusion on how the prototype should look like, you tend to survey a different number of users across different geographies, because whenever you are launching a newer version of a particular game or any spin-off of a particular popular game, like we have those different games like Resident Evil, we have, then we have games like your Silent Hill. So these are essentially a spin-off of a particular game, and there are certain genres that are associated with game. Like some are horror games, some are having very graphic content, some game are very violent in nature, some game are for kids, like that particular exercise games that are available in your Kinect application. So you need to first do a survey of the user, what they feel like, basis on the overall interaction with the Xbox console or the Kinect application. After you have completed the survey, you sit with your graphic designing team and you tend to explain these findings as a business analyst to that particular graphic designer. And you tend to ask that particular graphic designer how we should be designing this particular application. Like, what are the necessary sort of graphics that you would be taking into account. After then, you would be creating a simulation model. So here, whatever prototype are created, they are called as simulations environment, wherein they would be having a simulated what I would say actors. Like you have those people moving in the game, they are nothing but the simulated actors which are already available in their simulated environment. So you would be simulating your thought process with the help of these actors. And later point of time, once you are convinced as a business analyst that okay, basis on the response that we have received from different number of users across geographies, this is the simulated game that we have developed. So what is your thought process? Then the next step is to get that particular thing approved from different stakeholders who would be there in different locations. So they would be seeing the simulated game, which may be typically be of 4 to 5 minutes in duration, not the entire game duration. So they would be seeing, they would be checking the graphical content, the quality of the graphics, the quality of the animation, the quality of the user ease, and they would be deciding on whether they should go ahead with these particular set of features or not, whatever actions you might have configured in that particular game. So in this project, it's not essentially the business analyst forecast everything or foresees everything from a UI perspective. There are multiple peoples involved in this particular engagement to finalize these. And out of them, the most essential people would be the graphic designer or the UI UX people.
Okay. One more small question. Are the roles and responsibilities of business analysts similar in gaming industry as compared to like finance, insurance, or banking, or is it like
See,
completely
to the core, the roles and responsibilities are same. To the core, as in the core 6 knowledge areas of a business analyst, like requirement analysis and design, the solution assessment and evaluation, strategy analysis, BA planning and monitoring, requirement lifecycle and management. So these core areas would be same, but the work they do in that particular project, they would be different. To um, explain you more about BA's roles and responsibility, if you see, compare a business analyst roles and responsibility to a regular developer or tester, there's a huge difference, because BA role is the most dynamic role in any industry that you would see. If you are working as a business analyst in company A and you are executing a set of roles and responsibility, that would be completely different for a BA who is working in company B or company C or company D. However, the core elements, the core knowledge areas would be same, but the work they do, they would be completely different.
okay?
So it's not only about your gaming industry. If you consider the security industry wherein you are developing an antivirus application, if you consider your telecom industry where you are working with the telecom protocol, like Cisco and your if you consider an microprocessing or chip making industry like your Nvidia, who creates the graphic processors for the machines, or the functional industries like banking, insurance, healthcare. So all of these would be having business analyst with them, but the roles and responsibility would be different. But having said that, the core elements would remain the same, how they perform their roles and responsibility with the help of these knowledge areas, the 6 knowledge areas which are there. So just for your information, I started my career with Microsoft as I was the BA of their website xbox.com in the year 2010. So therein I was handling their APAC region. Whatever new games is to come, whatever the discounting modeling they used to do, I was responsible for collecting the requirements for them. So it was really nice working with the Xbox team. Anyways, let's move on. The advantages and disadvantages of the prototype. So whenever we are working in a prototyping model, we have certain advantages and disadvantages of a prototype. So we have these advantages for prototypes. So it reduces time and cost. Whenever we are mapping our visual concept to a particular screen or a particular UI, it essentially reduces the time and cost for that particular project, because we need not to explain each and everything to the business stakeholder again and again. Your prototype itself explains everything when you map it from a system point. After that, the next advantage is your improved and increased user involvement. So whenever you are creating a prototype and you are taking a particular feedback from a particular user, so essentially it improves and increases the user involvement, because they are necessarily giving you the feedback for that particular prototype that you have created in and around that particular system. So the final product is more likely to satisfy the user's desired look and feel. Now, since the prototype keeps on evolving till it gets delivered to the final um, uh, end user, the satisfaction level is very high, and it is often intended, since you are having a constant feedback with the customer, the satisfaction level would be very high. So these are the two essential advantages of using a prototype. Now, there are certain disadvantages of using prototype: insufficient analysis. So whenever you are creating a prototype, it gives you a feeling that, okay, you have already captured or have captured all the necessary elements that a prototype should have, which is very incorrect. The analysis is not complete when you are creating a prototype until and unless it gets finally approved. Even if it gets approved, there are still scope of improvement in that particular prototype. So that is a disadvantage. Second is user confusion of prototype and finished system. Now, essentially, this happens with the development team when they feel that the prototype which they have received is final system and nothing is going to change. So once you, typically this happens with the development team in our project. I have seen it many times. So whenever I give a prototype to the developer, he feels that this is the final system. And if you ask any change which is not in line with the prototype and it is contradicting, they would question me as a business analyst that your prototype is incorrect, which is absolutely make no sense. Prototypes are always liable to be getting evolved or liable for change. So you cannot perceive that the prototype which you have given to the development team is finished or the final system would look like these prototype only. If that being the case, that means the entire system we have conceptualized from day one. No, there are certain improvements that we make to a particular system, and when we get the final finished system, that may have a huge difference between what the prototype was initially and what the final system that we got today. So we as a business analyst can take a necessary measure over here. Necessary precautionary measure over here is like, whenever there is a change requested in a prototype, we can go on versioning that prototype, like what the new change that have been asked by the customer, because ultimately we are working on the approved version of the prototype. If after approval, if the customer is asking that, oh, okay, I need certain change, so that is liable for a version of that particular prototype. So not only prototype, for any document, once you have received the approval, after approval, if the customer is asking something, then you have to create a new version of that document. So that is how your versioning come into picture in context of your requirement gathering world. Now, same disadvantage, developer misunderstanding of user objectives. Like developer feels that this is the final prototype and this is how the system should behave like, which is absolutely wrong. That is not the final prototype. Even though it is approved, there is still scope of change. Now, the approved prototype might be having a chance of, let's say, 30% of improvement over what has been approved, but it won't be changing entirely. So it would be very what I would say incorrect to perceive that the prototype which are given to the development team is the final. There may be some what I would say some sort of scope of improvement, but that scope won't be huge. It would be 30% or 35%. It shouldn't be more than that. If it is more than that, then you have to question your business analysis ability. So the deviation shouldn't be more than that. After that, the developer attachment to the prototype. Now, this is a very sensitive thing. So whenever you question the development team, or whenever you go with a suggestion to the development team, okay, you have developed as per this prototype, and this is the necessary set of amendments we would like to see in the particular system. So developer has a very close attachment to the prototype, and he would always show you your created prototype. So you have to clear this misconception from a mind of a developer that this is not the final prototype. Even though it is approved, there is still lot of scope for improvement. So this is again a disadvantage of prototype. Then excessive development time of the prototype. Yes, it takes certain amount of time when you are developing a prototype, because you have to think simultaneously and create what I would say, capture your thinking on that particular graphical canvas. So it essentially takes a lot of time to create a prototype. And secondly, the expense of implementing prototype. So here what it talks about is like, if there is a change that is needed for that particular prototype, so how much deviation that prototype is arising. So today you got an approved prototype with 100 features, and tomorrow that 100 feature is coming out to be 110 feature. So that additional 10 feature is something an expense to the implementation of the prototype, because you have already implemented that 100 feature, but there are 10 other feature your prototype has missed. Now there would be a case 2. The case 2 would be you have captured 100 feature in that particular prototype, and now in that particular 100 feature, 25 features are not uh, no more useful to the customer. So he says that 25 features needs to be removed from that particular prototype. So the development time around that 25 features which are no more needed is again waste of time, which was earlier part of your prototype. So you need to ensure that you do not include any prototype, any functionality, not functionality, any UI element which may not be used in a near future. You have to bring it up in your interview session or your normal chat session, focus group session, or any XYZ session for that matter. So you have to ensure that none of the UI element which you have captured in your prototype is no more used or is no more in demand by the business users. Then there are certain criterion around what is the best system for prototypes and what is the worst system for prototypes. So the best system is like whenever your system is functional in nature, wherever you see an interaction in your particular system from a UI context, you would be using prototype. Now worst system would be whenever you have to explain something from a perspective of a use cases, or how the system would behave internally, like the batch processing or the user interaction. Then we have different set of tools for that. For user interaction, we have UML use cases. For batch processing, we can do it with the help of process modeling. Why use prototypes over there? So these are the potential ineligible candidates for prototyping. So whenever you see a user interaction and batch processing, prototyping is not the best option. Whenever you see a system wherein you have to model the UI screen, the screen dialogues, then prototyping is the best option. So you have to differentiate between when to use prototype and when to use other modeling techniques like your UML modeling or your process modeling. Now we would cover two models in terms of prototypes. One, hello, I think someone is unmute. So we would be covering two models in prototyping. One is the spiral approach, and the other one would be your DSDM approach. So we would first cover the spiral approach. So spiral approach is essentially used in a scenario wherein your project is more from an perspective like it is evolving. The system is evolving, and you are taking the inputs from different users like questionnaire, surveys, and all those kind of things. So typically in a gaming environment, we would be using spiral approach, wherein we would conceptualize the requirement, then we would create the prototype. Alongside that, we would be creating the requirements, verification, development, and so on. And this thing would keep on repeating until we get the final release. So it starts from the initial set of prototype. Then in the next cycle, the prototype keeps on evolving till we get the final justifiable prototype, wherein on grounds of which we would be doing the detailed designing, coding, integration, testing, and implementation. So this is the one model wherein which is heavily influenced by your prototypes. If you could see, there are n number of prototype cycles that is specifically highlighted in this particular model. Then the next model is your DSDM model, that is your dynamic system development method. So initially, here what happens, we do a typical pre-project activity, then we tend to understand the feasibility in and around that particular system with the help of prototype. So we create lots of prototype to understand the feasibility of that particular system. Then we lay out the foundation of exploration. Basis on that prototype, we go on further discussion with the business stakeholder. Now that is where when you do the exploration or the requirement elicitation, analysis, or design, whatever phase you have. After that you have completed your exploration, you come to engineering phase, wherein you develop code and particular do the testing with the QA team. After that, you go to the incremental, you have delivered one particular cycle, then this cycle would again be repeated. Only after 10-15 cycle, or depending on the objective of your project, how many cycle it would be needing, you would get your final project. And that after that, you would be conducting your post-project activity. Now this feasibility, foundation, exploration, engineering would give one increment of the product. After that, another increment of the product and deployment. So this particular model, dynamic system development method, is something that resembles to the agile methodology, but with only one exception, that it has greater emphasis on prototype rather than your core requirements or core functional requirements. So essentially, we have two models, the spiral model and dynamic system development method, which are heavily influenced by your prototypes. So these are the prototyping models that you would be using in dynamic system development model. Apart from whatever types we have seen in a generic perspective earlier, you have business prototype, you have usability prototype, you have performance and capacity prototypes, and then you have capability technique prototype. So this is the life cycle of DSDM model, like identifying a prototype, agree to a particular plan, create the prototype, and review the prototype. So now we would do some hands-on. Before that, any question, anyone? Okay. If anyone has not downloaded AXURE, I believe everyone has downloaded AXURE. Hello. If not downloaded, just go to this particular link I'm sending you. Here, download the previous version of AXURE, that is AXURE 7. Because I have my system running on AXURE 7. You have to enter your email ID and click on download and install it. Once it is installed, we'll do our hands-on. Can everyone confirm me whether they have installed it or not? Okay, everyone?
I'm doing it.
We are doing.
Okay, please do it. I'm taking a break of 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we will continue. When you open the UI editor, it would look like this. Okay, so we have certain sections in this. This is the section wherein you would be having all your pages, the screens that you would be developing. So by default, there would be 3 page coming by default in the application. If you create a new file, you would be getting these 3 pages. In uh, below that, you would be seeing a section wherein you would be having typical tools for that, for our purposes, whatever images if you would like to use, if there are some header thing which we would like to have, those things. And below that, there would be some interaction controls. If you want to create a master layout kind of thing, then you could leverage these sections. Towards the right, you would be having the interaction and the properties. Interaction is like how the screen would behave when you click a particular link, or if you would like to use a faces to particular um, element, UI element like button or anything. And then you would be having properties like changing the color, text, and all those things. So we'll first create a simple prototype. But first, take a rectangle. We would refer to our project, the very first project, the web-based element. So we'll create a first rectangle. So rectangle is nothing but a screen. So before that, we would rename this page as personal information. The personal information of whom? The insured. Insured as in who is willing to purchase the insurance from that particular company. Now after we have renamed this particular part, what we would do, we would create a particular rectangle. Just click on this small arrows to pop it up. Okay. Now after we have created it, we would be needing some input. For example, we would be having an image wherein we would be giving a logo of that particular company. So let's find some relevant logo on Google. So let's say I take this logo. I'll save it. Over here. On my desktop, I would go to this particular logo, and to this pane you would see in the properties window as import. So go to your desktop, wherever you have saved your logo, just click on it, and it should appear over here. Now it would by default take the original dimension of the logo. You have to resize it based on your need. So we have this particular logo. Okay, everyone is able to see the activity that I am doing on screen, right? Hello?
Yes.
Now next, we want to give a name to that particular system. So what I would do, I would click on heading 1 and pull it up, and then I would name it as Allstate Insurance portal. That is the name of my particular system. Okay. Now I would be needing two buttons for sign in and sign up. So towards this pane, you would be having something button field. So bring those two buttons onto your screen. One button, I would name it as sign in, and the next button I would name it as sign up. Now sign in is for the users who are new user to sign in is for the user who are already registered into the system, and sign up is for the user who are already sign up is for the user who are new to the system, who would be creating their sign in credential, and sign in for the user who are already registered in the system and they are returning users. So we would be creating two different pages for these two category of users. Now what we would do, we would color these particular box here. You could see a fill color option, so let me give it coloring as like this. Doesn't look good, but rather give it this color is fine. After that, I would create a horizontal line just to differentiate between the header element. I would create it like this. If I want to increase the width of the line, then I can go at this way. So this is my header section. Now I would be having a footer section. So just increase it a bit. Click on this line, Control C, Control V. You would be having a footer section. Here I would mention it as a text, a label control, wherein I would be writing a text as copyright all state incorporation the year 2018. After that, I need to ensure that it is in the middle of the screen. Now let me preview this, how this thing looks like. So I'll click on the play button and see this is how my prototype looks like. This is the screen ready for me with the header section, the logo, the name of the portal, the sign in and the sign up button, and the copyright information. Now until now, these buttons are not yet operable. It doesn't have any interaction. So what I need to do now, I have to add certain things into this particular page. So what I'll do, I'll first create a copy of the design. So for that, what I'll do, I'll create Control A, Control C, go to page 2 and paste it. And I would name this page as sign in page. Or let us first create sign up page. Now in the sign up page, what are the necessary information that we would be needing for a user to sign up? So information would be in the form of this label. Drag one particular label, and if there is a text field, drag that particular text field. Here you write it as name or insured full name, and make it bold. You can increase its size to, let's say, 20. You write it as insured address line 1. Simply copy this element. It would be easy for you. Insured address line 2. Reduce its size to 16 is better. Then there would be insured state. For insured state, we would be needing a drop down box wherein he could select it. So he'll click on this drop down list and bring it over here. Just double click it and you would be able to add the value. So I do not have the entire state list. So what I would do, I would go to Google and I would search on list of states in US. So these are my list of states. Control it, sorry, copy this, paste it in Notepad. Okay, so I got my list of states. Control. Before that, I need to check the formatting. Formatting is correct. I'll control AC everything over there, and I will come to this, double click on it, add menu. So if you want to add only a single item, for example, select state and click on OK. Only one item is added. If I want to add multiple items like I would be doing, I would just click on it and paste all the items that I want in that particular drop down. So I have all the items in the particular drop down. Let's play it and see how it looks like in UI. So you have all the state in the drop down. I'll go to the next step. State we have, address we have, full name we have. Now what's the next thing that we need is one more drop down. In this case, I would be needing insured status. Insured status as in whether he is currently insured by any other company insured by other company or he has no insurance at all, or insured spouse is insured. These kind of things also we tend to capture when we are uh, registering a particular user. After that, we have certain other elements like insured contact number, then insured email address. For that, we would also be needing some text box. So these are the preliminary set of information that we capture for the insured when he would come for a sign up or registration process. Now, I also want to ensure that this particular thing is not spammed. For that, I would be putting a captcha. So for captcha, what we would do, we would search for a captcha image. This looks good. Click on this captcha. So I've saved it in folder. What I would do next is add an image control over here and go to the right hand side. Sorry, go to the right hand side. Import that particular captcha. This is that particular captcha image. I don't want the image to be that huge size. This If we see that the space is not that much, we can always expand this particular thing and bring it down. After that, I would like to have a sign up button. So I would again click on this, and here I would place my sign up button. After that, in order to make it more appealing, I would take one more horizontal line, rather two. I would put one over here, and I would put one over here. Now it seems the things are not centrally aligned, so I'll select everything and press the right arrow to make it centrally aligned. If anything is missed out, you can put it over here. I want this line to be a bit darker. Same thing over here. So my sign up page is now ready. I'll click on play and I would see this is how my sign up page looks like for this particular application. Now this right side and left side is blank. So what about giving some information about the company? So what I would do, I can place some pictures over there. So what I would do, I'll Google some pictures, some appealing pictures. I'll save those images. So here I would import that particular picture. I would add some catchy line over here, like sign up in just 5 seconds. Sorry, 5 minutes. Waiting 5 minutes. I'll add some catchy line over here. And this is how my final UI would look like. Saving part I will tell you about. This is how I have designed my sign up page. Now after the user have signed up, it would redirect it to some particular page. So for that, what I would do. Okay, everyone done till here? Hello. So what I would do, I would create another page, right? Welcome page post sign in. Sorry, post sign up. I'll go to the other page and copy the entire sign up page and paste it over here. This is what would happen after I have clicked on sign up page. Sign up button. So after the user has signed up, so what it would be, we would be taking the next set of information from that particular user. So for that, you would be taking information like your insurance needs. Now before that, we would be taking his vehicle details. Vehicle name, vehicle type, vehicle year, vehicle model, odometer, VIN number, number of miles, and such details. So here essentially we won't be needing all those. So we can delete it, or rather we could transform this, delete this drop down and create doing text. Here instead of sign up, we'll create next. And okay, this is one section for vehicle. I would be creating a section for license as well. License state. Here you could again include a drop down. License number could be your license number. License validity. And you could put an indicator like whether the license entered has some violation pertaining to it or not. So here you would be giving a button as check violation pertaining to that particular license. So if there are certain violations, it would be reported over here. So for that, you could create a table like a structure over here. You could enter if there are any violations, like violation date, severity, status. The violation date is let it be 7/7/2015. The other could be 7/7/2016. The severity could be major, high. Status is reactive, status is active. So this is essentially to check whether the driver license which has been entered on that particular field, the driver has some active violation or court case pending against him. If there are pending cases against him, then he won't be allowed to purchase the insurance. If there are no pending cases, then he would be able to allow purchase of the insurance. After that, we have taken this particular two details. We would also be taking a couple of other details. Requested coverages. For that, I would create a things like checkboxes, whatever coverage he is looking for. Comprehensive, collision coverage, sure, notice coverage, underinsured, motorist coverage, medical payment coverage. After that, I would be having a button calculate my quotation. After having provided all this information, okay. So we have developed two pages. One is your sign up page, and then there is a post sign up page. After that, we would be adding one more page. Add child page. wherein we would be needing yes, quotation. So in that particular page, we would be writing this delete this element. Create two buttons. Recode purchase. And here we write congratulations. Your code is ready. Okay, so these are the three pages we have developed. So we have developed sign up page wherein you would be entering the basic details or would be requesting the basic details from the insured. After he has clicked on sign up, he would be taking to the another set of page wherein he would be creating all this detail or entering all this detail. And after that, whenever he clicks on this quotation button, calculate code, the final page would be this, that based on the information entered by you, the final quoted amount is this thing. So we have these three pages individually. If I click on play button, we have this page. If I click on another play button, we have these two pages. So we have page 1, page 2, and we have page 3. So there is no interaction. If I click on any of this button, nothing is actually happening. Now what I will do next, I would add interaction to them. So for that, I'll click on sign up button. I don't need this thing. I would go to the right hand side menu. Okay, I'll click on sign up button. On click, there would be an event. I'll click on click event, open link, and I would select what is the next page I want to see. So there I would see welcome page post sign up. I'll click on OK and I'll click on save. So saving part I'll do later on. I'll go to the next page. Here also there is a calculate code button. So on click of calculate code button, what should happen? It would take me to this quotation. I'll click on quotation page. Now on sign up button, I would be taken up to the sign up page. I'll click on sign up page. Sign in button we haven't activated it yet. So sign up button, sorry, sign up page. We also have a sign up button over here. Add interaction on click as sign. So every page wherein we see a sign up button, we would be adding that particular click event to that particular sign up page. The quotation page is also having click, open link, sign up page. Now let's do the interaction now. I'll head directly to the first page, that is sign up page, and I will play that first page. So this is my first page. I would click on sign up. The sign up screen would appear. I would enter all the information of the user, select a particular state, this thing, enter the contact numbers, enter the email address, and I would click on sign. After that, it would ask me more information. I would enter all the relevant information about the insurance state. For example, I entered Texas, I entered the license number and something like this, license validity. You could also use a date time picker over here, 7/7/2019. I would click on check violation. If there is a report would come. If it is not there, a report won't come. I would enter some vehicle details. If I want what all coverages needs to be part of this, I could select it over there. After that, I'll click on calculate code and it would give me a final code. So this way we have seen how this interaction works, especially when click of a particular button. When I click on this particular button, I am able to see an interaction. So this is an example of typical insurance industry UI screen mockup scenario. This is how you create it using AXURE. Any questions, anyone? Hello.
So, hello,
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah, please go on.
So, this prototype is also used by the developer, right?
Yes, of course. What would happen on click of sign up button? What are the typical details that needs to be done? Those all things the developer could easily understand. But something that developer cannot understand in this prototype is like when I click on check violation, I have only shown a report. This check violation do not have a logic. Essentially what happens in insurance project is like when you click on check violation, it directly calls a particular system, for example, a LexisNexis system, wherein all the violation history are saved. So basis on the license number entered and the state and the validity, the details populate over here. So this is something we cannot express in this prototype, but we have expressed that there would be a check violation button, and underneath that button, we would be having a section which would be detailing out these details. Now selection of this coverage would be having certain logic. So ultimately, basis on the number of coverages plus minus, the calculated code would increase and decrease. Now that calculation is something for which we have to develop an algorithm using Excel sheet. We cannot develop it in the prototype because prototyping has certain limitations.
Okay.
Okay, so what happens essentially in companies is like sometimes you may not be getting this particular tool always. So in order to create prototypes when you do not have any particular tool, you always have Excel with you. So we would create a similar kind of prototype in Excel. So what you need to do first is select a typical amount of cell, any number of cells, click on this, format that particular cell and give the column width as 2 so that we get a graph paper like of thing. Okay. After that, let's say from cell D to cell H, we would create our canvas wherein we would be drawing this prototype and we would color it as gray. Okay. So this is the space wherein we would be creating our prototype. You could include few more cells as well and format it as gray. In that, we would select the top cells as a header section. For that, what we would do, we would select this much amount of cell and color it in a different format, let's say orange format. Then what we would do, you're able to see my screen, right, everyone?
Yes.
Then you would be inserting a picture. So the same pictures which we had, be inserting the same logo on state, and we have our logo over here. So we got our logo. Now we want to insert a title. So the same title we would be having, all state insurance portal. If you would like to bold it or highlight it, you can do so. Allstate insurance portal. If you feel it is taking more space, select that's fine as well. We would be needing that particular different color. Okay. So here is where we would be writing our copywriting for copyright. So this is our footer section. Once this thing is done, we would be entering our details like insured details, and we do not have any text boxes. So what we would do, we would instead highlight it as in white color, right? Insured full name, insured address line 01, insured address line 02, insured state, then insured state. Then if you want, you could include the captcha code like we did image. Here we will be creating a submit button. Get my code button. For that button, you have to select this particular area and you have to choose what should be the color of that particular button. Get my code button is over there. And here you could create your sign in button and sign up button. Now our first page is ready. I'll rename it as home page. I'll create one more tab and we would rename it as welcome page, and another tab wherein we would create a final code. So what we would do, we would control ASD all, paste it over there, and again within this page, paste it over there. So in final code, we want some information like what is the final quotation we must have received. Here we would write it as purchase equal the typical two buttons that we have. So here we would write that line basis on the information you provided, your final quotation is 599.95. Since it's an Excel sheet, so when I clicked on this particular cell, it expanded it. So what I would do, Control X, Control V over here, I would bring it over here. Whatever was the cell color, I would recolor the cell that particular way. Here I have entered this thing. So since it's an Excel, it is rounding up the values. So you could disable that rounding up function and write the value whatever you want. So how that could be done, that would be an assignment. You have to find it out. That I won't say. I would rather say you how to create the interaction. So you had the home page. Now in get my code, what you need to do, click on this hyperlink in that current place in this document. Click on welcome page. Now on the welcome page, you have to click on it, hyperlink, and go to the final code page. So this is how the cycle would work. After you have entered this information, you would click on this particular get my code. After clicking on this page, you would land it up to the welcome page. After you have clicked on welcome page, you would be landed up to the final code. So whatever interaction would happen, that would happen through hyperlink in case of Excel, unlike the case in AXURE. So AXURE has much what I would say sophisticated control. In Excel also it could be achieved, but you have to map it up in that particular way so that the interaction is achieved. Now there are other function also. For example, in case of state, you could use drop down. You could also use radio button. You could also format this particular item like 600 and all. This I won't tell you right now. Rather, this would be your assignment. You have to come up with this particular prototype, and I want you to create the screen flow and mockups for the project I have given. Whatever project you have selected, basis on the platform. If it's a web-based project, then this prototype is fine. If it's a mobile-based prototype, then you could create mobile-based prototype as well with this particular application, AXURE. but it is not available in AXURE 7. In AXURE 8, they have a functionality wherein you could use mobile-based prototype. So rather, you could use one more tool called as Just-in-Mind. It is free tool, and this particular tool has that particular functionality to create mobile-based prototype. So those who have created, chosen the project work as the cell phone based quotation, they could use this particular tool, Just-in-Mind prototype. So when you click on this new icon, after you have installed it, it would ask you what's the platform you are targeting, tablet, mobile, or whatever. So let's say I select a particular platform like iPhone 4. It would ask you whether you want to have an MP or example. If you create example, and if you would like to create a sign-in screen, it would directly show you the sign-in screen, wherein you could start customizing your work. So this is something that you have to explore and come up with a prototype for the project work I have given. So once you click on simulate, there is a simulate button like we have a play button in AXURE. You would be able to see the prototype in action. This